The municipal cemetery is like an oasis of life with lush vegetation and beautiful flowers as the last refuge of pristine nature near the dusty and overwhelming city. That's why Leo loved to visit it. It was free from the popular prejudice that it was a scary place where the souls of the dead could supposedly roam. Leo didn't believe in these things, perhaps because at 20 years old, he had experienced much worse things than urban legends about imaginary dangers when he was forced to constantly face real threats as fundamental as hunger, cold, and physical insecurity. There was no place in his life for ghosts. Leo was a homeless person. He himself no longer understood or remembered how he had become homeless. It seemed to him that he had always been indigent. But paradoxically, he remembered his life before being on the streets because his mother, the only close and beloved person in his life, was alive then. But she died when he was only 12 years old, and almost immediately after that, Leo found himself on the streets. As a child, Leo had suffered a lot. He had to sleep under bridges, cover himself with cardboard to avoid freezing to death in the winter, beg, steal, and fight. Occasionally, the police would catch him, after which he lived in an orphanage. However, he couldn't stand it there for more than a week and always ran away. Leo hated this institution because it reminded him of his mother and the fact that she was no longer there. And the street gave him the illusion that he had simply matured early and had left his parents' house, where he could return someday to see again the most beloved person in his world. But his childhood rejection of tragedy had passed, and Leo had accepted the loss. He was clear that his mother was gone. In addition, since he was 17 years old, he regularly visited her grave and maintained it. That day, he also came to his mother's grave with a bouquet of freshly cut wildflowers. He came often because he had become friends with the cemetery guard. The old, gray-haired and hunched-over man, whom Leo called Don Chucho, was kind to the young man, letting him sleep in his hut when he needed it, finding him small jobs in the cemetery, feeding him, and even giving him some money. On this day, Leo was going to renew the tombstone because Don Chucho had given him some paint and a brush that someone had left on one of the graves. The first thing he had to do was clean the ground of weeds, and the young vagabond squatted down to pull out the grass. In his enthusiasm, he didn't realize when someone approached him slowly. It was a woman. She appeared to be about 45 years old, and the lady's clothing, skin, and hair indicated that she was from a wealthy class. Only when she started to sob did Leo turn around and see the visitor. "Why are you crying here?" Leo asked, surprised, standing up and approaching the woman. "Did you mistake the grave?" "No," replied the stranger. "I've been here before. I come to pray for the repose of her soul." Leo looked with astonishment at the woman's wet eyes. It was hard to believe that his mother and this respectable lady could have anything in common. "Thank you for taking care of her grave," the mysterious stranger suddenly said. "Did someone hire you? Have you been paid at least? Let me give you some money too." The boy thought the woman had mistaken the grave because she was tormented by grief or because she was completely crazy. The expression in his eyes betrayed his thoughts, and the stranger immediately caught on. "Don't you think I knew Daniela?" she asked. "Well, actually, no," replied the homeless boy, confused and unsure. "And how did you meet my mother?" "How?" "Your mother?" asked the woman. "It can't be. Danny is your... I thought you were just... hired. And I..." The strange visitor at the cemetery began to mutter something incoherent, and then her face turned pale. "What's wrong, ma'am?" Leo asked. A moment later, the woman lost consciousness and collapsed to the ground. Leo was surprised to see this scene, but he reacted quickly. In a few moments, he ran to Don Chucho, the cemetery watchman, and asked for help. The old man was also surprised by the appearance of the strange visitor. "Come on, lift her head," Don Chucho told Leo. "You have to wake her up and then give her a sip of water." Don Chucho poured water from the bottle onto the woman's face and slapped her cheeks. She opened her eyes. "Well, ma'am, are you back with us?" Come on, get up, we'll take you to my shack, we'll put you on the couch, you need to rest, Don Chucho said, affectionately. The woman smiled faintly as she looked at Leo and then whispered, "Oh my God, how long I've been looking for you," and became lost in thought for a while. Her name was Bettina. She was born into a humble and large family with 4 other siblings. They lived in a small town in the interior of the country, where it was difficult to find well-paid employment, so her parents could barely make ends meet. When Bettina was 14, she got a part-time job as a nanny at a daycare center, which was a noticeable contribution to the family budget. But upon graduating from high school, the girl was determined to leave her hometown to go to the capital. Since she was a child, she had dreamed of the big city. Television programs and movies had created an image of the metropolis as a dream city in her mind, but Bettina was naturally realistic and aware that she was venturing into the unknown, that no one was waiting for her there, and that she would have to work hard to succeed. And so it was, even a little worse. It was not easy to even get the most basic job. Without experience, contacts, and at least a training degree, no one wanted to hire the young woman. Bettina spent more than a week and almost all her money before she got lucky. She found another job advertisement to work as an employee in a mansion. It turned out that a wealthy widow was looking for a domestic servant. Her husband, a businessman, had died a year before. The deceased had left her a large inheritance, including this luxurious 8-bedroom mansion. The woman lived in it with her 2 adult children, and they were absolutely incapable of managing the household. They needed a live-in employee, to whom the landlady was willing to give 2 days off per week. The widow's eldest son followed in his father's footsteps and became a business owner, while the younger one was the typical spoiled rich kid. He didn't want to study or work and only bragged about the money he hadn't even earned. Bettina was liked by her landlady, as she was used to working hard and performed her job with great attention to detail. She didn't complain about anything, even doing physically demanding work in the yard and garden when the gardener was absent. Fascinated by her new job and inspired by the idea that she would now start making good money, Bettina didn't realize how, in between, the younger son of the landlady became interested in her, almost jokingly. He was the typical narcissistic womanizer who believed he was irresistible and superior to everyone else. The girl from a small town, of course, felt flattered by the attention of the wealthy city slicker and trusted him. They began a relationship. In secret. Later, the girl realized why he had asked her not to tell his mother or brother anything about their relationship. The boy already had a girlfriend, also from a wealthy family, a candidate approved by his mother. Bettina found out by chance when she overheard her lover talking on the phone. The spoiled young man immediately confessed to it. Bettina's trusting heart was shattered into pieces by a cruel deception. It so happened that almost the same day, or literally a day later, the girl found out she was pregnant. This shocked and scared her. Bettina told her lover everything, who at that time said indifferently, "Abort it, I'll pay for it. It's not in my plans to become a father, much less of your child." Confused by what had happened, the girl hurried to ask for protection from her landlady, who had treated her quite well until then. But the widow sided with her son, telling Bettina, "Our family and I personally will never accept this child, and don't get your hopes up. My grandchildren can't have a housemaid as their mother." The pregnant woman's eyes filled with tears upon hearing these words. That night she asked the widow for her last paycheck and told her that she would no longer work in her mansion. The widow was glad that Bettina did so because she knew she could not force the girl to get rid of the child. The pregnant maid with a growing belly would drive the whole family crazy. The widow gladly gave her the money she owed her and even wanted to give her a fairly large additional sum, but Bettina refused proudly. She no longer needed her money or her job. She could not live under the same roof as the people who had treated her so cruelly, so even though she had nowhere else to go, she left the mansion. Bettina had managed to save some money by then because being a live-in maid relieved her of the need to buy food and pay rent. That same night Bettina rented a cheap room in a tenement. Sitting on the bed and hugging her knees, she thought about how she was going to live her life. She did not intend to abort. She wanted to give birth and raise that child no matter what, but she needed a job as soon as possible while the pregnancy was not noticeable. The next morning, she went to a nearby restaurant to see if there was a vacancy, and luckily it turned out to be for a kitchen assistant. She was hired on a trial basis, and Bettina proved her worth. The team was very close-knit, and Bettina became especially good friends with one of her colleagues. Her name was Dani. She was slightly older than Bettina and had also recently come from the countryside. The girls became such close friends that they seemed like sisters. Moreover, after a while, Dani offered her pregnant friend to rent an apartment together to save money. Bettina felt cared for and supported by Dani, and she was glad to find a soulmate in such a difficult time in her life. It wasn't long before the time came for the birth, and a strong and healthy baby boy was born. But what happened next turned the young mother's life upside down. On the day the baby turned 1 month old, he disappeared. And he didn't go alone, but with Dani. It was evident that the friend had stolen Bettina's baby and fled. The mother, who had lost her child, almost went crazy with grief. She wondered why Dani would want her son. Police and independent searches yielded no results. The fugitive seemed to have vanished into thin air. However, the inconsolable mother continued trying to find her son and periodically resumed her efforts. One day, many years later, when Bettina had the opportunity, she hired a good private detective who found Dani, or rather, her grave. So now Bettina, a grown woman, occasionally visits the grave of her former friend who had betrayed her so cruelly. Bettina remained lying on the ground and repeated softly, looking at Leo, "How long I was looking for you, my son. How long I was waiting for this moment." Leo was already convinced he was dealing with a mentally ill person, so he eventually stopped paying attention to what she said. "Don Chucho," said Leo, "well, how are we going to lift her up? Should I take her by the hands and you take her by the feet, or what? Or should we help her to her bed?" "You don't need to lift me," said Bettina. "I'll get up now. I feel better. Give me your hand, son." "I'm not your son," said the vagabond. "My mother lies right here," said Leo angrily, pointing at the grave. Bettina stood up and began her story. At first, the boy listened distantly, but when the woman got to the part about her pregnancy, and especially the moment of meeting the waitress named Dani, he listened without taking his eyes off her. "Then," said Leo when Bettina had finished her story, "isn't my mother buried there? Isn't she the one who gave birth to me?" The boy staggered backwards awkwardly, as if his legs were failing him. There was a bench nearby, and he sat down. "I am your true mother," said Bettina, tears filling her eyes. She approached her son and sat down beside him. Calming down a bit, she added, "And the one buried here is my friend Dani, or rather the one who pretended to be my friend and thus earned my trust. And do you know who told her to do it? My failed mother-in-law, the same wealthy widow I worked for. She was afraid that somehow I would use my son against her, blackmail her, or claim part of her fortune. Of course, I didn't have those plans, but the widow was afraid, so she hired Daniela for a lot of money to steal you and deliver you to her. She wanted to raise you herself, the so-called grandmother. That's what I recently discovered." Leo continued to listen to his mother's story with wide eyes, holding his head with both hands and shaking it. But the curious thing is that the old rich woman miscalculated. Dani was not predictable at all. Not only did she keep the money they paid her for the theft, but she didn't deliver the child, that is, you, to your sweet grandmother. It turns out that Daniela was sterile. Doctors told her when she was a teenager that she would never be able to have children, so she dared to stand up to the rich family and keep you. It seems that she spent some time with you and got used to it. Her maternal instinct awakened right away, as happens with women, and she couldn't be separated from you. In part, I understand her, so now I forgive her and don't hold a grudge. Well, then, when Dani took you in, of course she was afraid that your biological father or grandmother would find her, that they would track her down somehow, so she came to this small town with you. And I think she was afraid of running into me somewhere, so I couldn't find you quickly. My ex-boyfriend, if you can call him that, initially denied any involvement in what happened. I thought about it and almost immediately suspected that his family was behind the kidnapping, so one day I went to see them and asked them straight up, "My baby has been kidnapped, confess." They were surprised by my audacity and impertinence and denied everything, bewildered. On another occasion, I managed to talk to your father alone. He also dismissed my suspicions and accused me of being useless for losing his son. Imagine that, he said his son. I realized it was useless to talk to them, so I went to the law enforcement authorities and informed them of my suspicions about that wonderful family. I don't know if an investigation was carried out or not, but the police didn't help me at all. So gradually everything quieted down. A month and a half ago, a guy came to see me and told me he had been sent by a wealthy man, your father, to ask me to come and see him for a very important matter. I had a feeling that something was wrong, and without thinking, I accepted. When I arrived, I saw him lying in his bed with an intravenous line, with some kind of sensors on top, and 2 doctors by his side. "I'm very sick, Bettina," he told me right away, "and I may die soon." It turned out he had terminal stomach cancer. So, anticipating the imminent end, he decided to clear his conscience with a confession. "You were right," he said, "it was my mother who organized the kidnapping." Anyway, he told me everything as it happened. But that wasn't all. He told me that his mother had died of cancer a few years ago, and that his brother had died last year in a plane crash. And now he had inherited everything. Everything his father and brother had earned, he inherited. But he will probably die soon and wants to give it all to me. "I only have distant relatives," he said, "but we never got along, so I don't want them to receive anything. Also, I owe you an apology, and I want to redeem myself, at least a little, do something good before I die." It was him who advised me to look for you and Danny again, saying that technology had advanced and there were more possibilities to find you. And then he even begged me, pleaded with me to take the money and go to a good private investigator, which I did. He couldn't find you, but he found out where Daniela was buried. What happened to this man? Well, my supposed father. Is he dead? Leo asked. No, he's alive, but he's in hospice care. The home doctors couldn't provide good care for him anymore. He's very ill. Leo, shaken by the avalanche of information that had fallen upon him, couldn't move. "I'm so happy to have found you here, son. I was desperate to find you. When I heard that Danny had died, I thought all hope was lost. But then I got lucky. I don't hold any grudges. I know she was like a mother to you and you lost her early. I understand. But you're my son." "I understand too," said Leo. "I just have to process all of this. I'm asking you, let's go see him. He's very sick. I'm afraid he might die any day. He really wanted to see you and asked me to find you. I'm sorry, but I look like a bum." "It doesn't matter, son. I'll buy you plenty of nice clothes, and not just clothes, but everything you need. I'm rich now, so you'll be too. But there's no time for shopping and dressing up now. Let's go, please." Leo didn't resist and they went to the hospice. On the way, the boy told his mother about his life, how he had been living on the streets for the last 8 years after the death of his mother, whom he used to call Daniela. Bettina was stunned by his story. She couldn't hold back her tears. And then Leo burst into tears, but they were no longer tears of despair or sadness, but of relief that something bad had finally come to an end. With red eyes, they arrived to see Leo's father. He was alive, although his consciousness was already confused. The doctor said the tumor had started to disintegrate and he was suffering from severe poisoning. In such a state, the heart usually fails and the person dies. Leo and his mother approached him. "Father, it's me, Leo, your son. Can you hear me, Father? I came to see you." The man heard him and with difficulty, smiling, he extended both hands. He couldn't get up anymore. Leo lifted him slightly and hugged him tightly. "It's me. Can you hear me?" repeated the boy. But his father couldn't respond. Tears just rolled down his cheeks. Leo looked him in the face and knew his dad could hear him. His son hugged him again and didn't let go of his arms until, after a minute or two, his father's heart stopped beating.